I am Sophia, 32 years old, and this morning my phone lit up with 14 missed calls. 3 weeks of silence shattered in an instant. I stared at the screen, my sister Emily's final words echoing in my head. "Why don't you just disappear? You ruined our lives." My parents had stood behind her, nodding in agreement. So I did what they wanted. I disappeared. Now looking at those 14 calls, my hands won't stop shaking. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit subscribe, and stay with me as I explain how cutting off your family can sometimes be the first step toward healing. Growing up in suburban Boston with my parents Laura and Robert Thompson was what most would call normal on the surface. Our two-story colonial house with its neat front yard and white picket fence looked like something from a magazine. Dad worked as an accountant while Mom ran a small bakery downtown. 6 years separated me from my younger sister Emily, a gap that defined our relationship from the beginning. From my earliest memories, I was the responsible one. By age 10, I was helping pack Emily's lunch for kindergarten, checking her homework, and making sure she had her stuffed rabbit for bedtime. Our parents worked long hours building their careers, and I naturally stepped into a caretaker role. I didn't mind, really. I loved my little sister with her blonde curls and infectious giggle. When she would reach for my hand with her tiny fingers, I felt important, needed. The expectations placed on us couldn't have been more different, though. My report cards needed to be perfect. B. Plus, why not an A? Second place in the science fair? Try harder next time, Sophia. Meanwhile, Emily brought home C's and received praise just for passing. She was the baby, the precious one who needed protecting. I was the strong one who could handle the pressure. Early signs of what would become a pattern appeared around the time Emily turned 8. When toys went missing, they would mysteriously appear in my room. When cookies disappeared from Mom's bakery, samples, somehow crumbs, ended up in my backpack. Little things easily dismissed. I still remember the first major incident. I was 14. Emily only 8. Mom's favorite crystal vase, a wedding gift from Grandma, lay shattered on the living room floor when our parents came home. Emily had been trying to reach a book on a high shelf and knocked it over. When confronted, her blue eyes filled with tears as she pointed at me. "Sophie told me to climb up there. She said I was too scared to do it." The look of disappointment on my parents' faces cut deeper than any punishment. I tried to explain, but my words fell on deaf ears. "Why would you encourage such dangerous behavior, Sophia? You know better. You're the older sister." That night established a pattern that would follow us for decades. Emily learned she could shift blame with a few tears, and I learned that my truth mattered less than her comfort. Throughout high school, I maintained a 4.0 GPA while juggling debate team, yearbook committee, and a weekend job at the local library. Every minute was scheduled, every achievement noted on college applications. Meanwhile, Emily entered her teenage rebellion phase, early skipping classes, sneaking out, experimenting with cigarettes and beer by 14. My parents wrung their hands but offered few consequences. When she would get caught, the blame often circled back to me somehow. "You were supposed to be watching her, Sophia. Why didn't you notice she was struggling? You make everything look so easy, it makes her feel inadequate." The message became clear. Her behavior was at least partially my responsibility. During my senior year, I received a full scholarship to Stanford. It was my dream school with one of the best computer science programs in the country. The acceptance letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday, and I danced around my bedroom, the future bright before me. That evening, Mom cried at dinner. "Who will help with Emily? California is so far away." Dad remained silent, disappointment evident in his tight lips and furrowed brow. 2 weeks later, I declined Stanford and accepted Boston University's partial scholarship instead. I told myself it was a practical decision. Living at home would save money. I could continue working at the library. It made sense. The look of relief on my parents' faces convinced me I had made the right choice, even as my dreams of California sunshine faded away. College years passed in a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and continuing to help manage Emily's increasingly chaotic life. While I maintained my scholarships and worked 20 hours weekly, Emily barely graduated high school and enrolled half-heartedly in community college. She dropped out after one semester claiming it wasn't for her. My parents didn't push the issue. She was finding herself. They said she had time to figure things out. I graduated summa cum laude with a computer science degree and immediately landed a job at a growing tech company in downtown Boston. My starting salary was more than my parents had ever made combined. I found a small apartment 15 minutes from the family home and established my independence while remaining close enough to help when needed. And they always needed something. 5 years flew by and my career trajectory continued upward. What began as an entry-level coding position evolved into a senior role, then team leadership. By 30, I was leading a department of 12 developers and had more than doubled my initial salary. Each promotion came with congratulatory flowers from colleagues, celebratory dinners with work friends, and increasingly uncomfortable interactions with my family. Success changed how they saw me. The first time I showed up for Sunday dinner in my new car, a modest but new Honda dad inspected it with pursed lips. "Must be nice to have that kind of money to throw around," he commented, though he knew I had saved for 2 years to afford it. Mom changed the subject quickly, asking if I was seeing anyone. Her usual not-so-subtle reminder that career achievements meant little without a husband and children. Emily had by then cycled through various jobs, never lasting more than a few months at each. Waitressing, retail receptionist, direct sales for 3 different multi-level marketing companies. Nothing stuck. Her apartment, which I helped her secure with first and last month's rent as a gift, changed nearly as often as her employment. Then she met Michael, 6'2", with broad shoulders and a charming smile that never quite reached his eyes. He worked construction sometimes, or at least, that's what he claimed. His employment seemed as sporadic as Emily's, but he had a confidence about him that she found irresistible. Within 3 months of dating, they moved in together. Within 6, the stories began. They couldn't make rent because Michael's boss hadn't paid him. Their electricity was shut off due to a billing error. His truck broke down and needed expensive repairs. Each crisis mysteriously required exactly the amount of money Emily knew I had recently received from a bonus or tax return. Information she gleaned during our increasingly rare family dinners, where the conversation inevitably turned to my financial situation. "How much did that promotion increase your salary?" Emily would ask Michael beside her, nodding with interest. "That project you mentioned last time, did you get that big bonus for it?" Mom and Dad never redirected these questions, seemingly as interested in the answers as Emily was. The breaking point of this phase came when my parents' 12-year-old car finally died. The repair costs exceeded the vehicle's value, and they found themselves without transportation. Dad needed to commute to his accounting firm, and Mom's bakery required early morning deliveries. Without thinking twice, I purchased them a reliable used Toyota. Nothing flashy, but dependable. I drove it to their house one Saturday morning, handed them the keys, and expected nothing but thanks. What I got instead was a complicated mess of emotions. Mom cried. Dad looked embarrassed, and Emily, who happened to be visiting, seethed with visible resentment. After I left, she called me. The phone vibrated in my car's cup holder as I drove home. "So you're just showing off now?" She spat when I answered. "You know, Michael and I have been saving for a car for months, but you never offered to help us. But you just drop a new car in Mom and Dad's driveway like it's nothing. You always need to be the hero, don't you, Sophie?" I tried explaining that our parents needed transportation for their livelihoods, that I wasn't trying to show off or be a hero. But Emily had already crafted her narrative, one where my generosity was actually a calculated move to make her look bad. That evening, Mom called to thank me again for the car, but also to gently suggest that perhaps I could help Emily and Michael too, just to keep the peace. That was the first time I recognized the pattern clearly for what it was. No matter what I did, how I tried to help, or what I sacrificed, it would never be right. Either I wasn't doing enough or I was doing too much in the wrong way. I began creating distance-limiting family dinners to once a month instead of weekly screening calls and establishing boundaries that felt foreign and uncomfortable, but necessary. The economic downturn hit Boston hard, and my parents' small businesses suffered almost immediately. Dad's accounting clients began cutting costs, many dropping professional services in favor of do-it-yourself tax software. Mom's bakery saw orders decline as people eliminated luxuries from their budgets. Within 6 months, they were struggling to make mortgage payments on the house that had been our home for 25 years. They didn't ask directly for help. They didn't have to. Mom mentioned casually during our monthly dinner how they might need to sell the house. Dad commented on sleepless nights worrying about finances. Their pride wouldn't allow direct requests, but the hints were clear enough. I offered to cover their mortgage for 6 months' time, enough for them to reorganize their businesses or find alternative income sources. The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. I set up automatic transfers from my account to theirs, hardly noticing the impact on my finances thanks to my recent promotion to lead developer. What I hadn't anticipated was Emily and Michael's situation deteriorating simultaneously. Their apartment building changed ownership, rents increased, and they couldn't afford to stay. With nowhere else to go, they moved into our parents' home temporarily stretched from weeks to months with no end in sight. My visits became increasingly stressful. The dining room table, once the site of merely uncomfortable conversations, transformed into a battleground of passive-aggressive comments and outright hostility. Michael would sprawl on the couch, making minimal effort to acknowledge my presence while Emily cataloged the ways life had been unfair to her lately. My parents alternated between mediating and adding their own grievances to the mix. 3 months into paying their mortgage, I discovered something that shook me to my core. I had stopped by unexpectedly on a Tuesday evening to drop off some specialty ingredients Mom needed for a large bakery order. The house appeared empty, but as I placed the package on the kitchen counter, voices drifted from the back office. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but my name caught my attention. "The problem is Sophia doesn't understand how tight things really are," Dad was saying. "These mortgage payments are helping, but the business loan is what's killing us." What business loan? I hadn't heard about any additional financial troubles. We shouldn't have co-signed for Emily and Michael. Mom's voice sounded tired, but they were so certain the landscaping business would take off. I froze, piecing together what I was hearing. My parents had co-signed a business loan for my sister and her boyfriend, a detail no one had shared with me despite my significant financial support of the family. I slipped out without announcing my presence, mind racing with questions. Research that evening revealed the truth. 6 months earlier, Michael had convinced Emily he could start a successful landscaping business. Despite having no experience in the field or business management, they had created an LLC and secured a $50,000 loan with my parents as co-signers. The business had failed within 3 months, having acquired equipment they couldn't properly use and employees they couldn't manage. The loan defaulted, leaving my parents responsible for the debt on top of their existing financial struggles. I should have been angry, but all I felt was a bone-deep exhaustion. The next Sunday dinner, I arrived with a carefully constructed proposal. I would help pay down the business loan too, stretching my finances uncomfortably thin but still manageable. In exchange, I wanted Emily and Michael to take financial literacy classes and create a repayment plan even if the amounts were small. The reaction was not what I expected. Rather than gratitude or even embarrassment, my offer was met with defensiveness. Emily accused me of trying to control her life. Michael suggested that since I had so much sharing, more of my success was the least I could do for family. Most surprisingly, my parents sided with them. "You don't understand the pressure they're under," Sophia, Mom said, patting Emily's hand. "They're young and still figuring things out. Not everyone can be as naturally disciplined as you." I wondered when 30 had become too young to be financially responsible, but I kept that thought to myself. I modified my offer, removing the conditions and simply extending financial help. Everyone seemed satisfied with this arrangement, though the atmosphere remained tense. As I was leaving that evening, I overheard my dad in the kitchen with Michael. "She could definitely be helping more," he was saying. "With what she makes, this is barely a dent in her finances." The words stung more than I cared to admit. The mortgage payments and now the loan assistance constituted nearly 40% of my monthly income. I had delayed my plans to buy my own home and had dipped into my emergency fund more than once to cover these expenses, but in their eyes, it would never be enough. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was reviewing my credit report as part of an application for a condo I hoped to purchase. Despite the financial strain of helping my family, I had managed to save enough for a down payment, and the property was modest enough to fit my adjusted budget. What I discovered sent ice through my veins. 3 credit cards had been opened in my name within the past 4 months. Cards I had never applied for received or used. The addresses listed were variations of my parents' home address. The outstanding balances totaled nearly $20,000. My first thought was identity theft by an unknown criminal. I began the process of reporting the fraud only to freeze when the credit card company revealed the phone number associated with the accounts. It was Emily's cell. The reality crashed down like a physical weight. My own sister had stolen my identity, opened fraudulent accounts, and racked up substantial debt in my name. The purchases, when the representative listed them, were clearly not necessities: designer clothing, high-end electronics, weekend getaways to nearby beach resorts. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, alternating between disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a case of different priorities. This was premeditated fraud, a crime that could impact my financial future for years, from someone who shared my blood, who I had helped raise, who I had sacrificed for repeatedly. Sunday dinner arrived, and I went through the motions mechanically. I brought the usual bottle of wine, complimented Mom's cooking, and engaged in small talk about the weather and local news, all while the printed credit card statements burned a hole in my purse. When dessert was served, I placed the statements on the table next to my untouched apple pie. I didn't yell or accuse. I simply asked, "Can someone explain these to me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked confused at first, then her eyes widened as she scanned the documents. Dad removed his glasses, cleaned them unnecessarily, and replaced them without meeting my gaze. Emily stared at her plate, suddenly fascinated by the crust of her pie. Michael was the only one who maintained eye contact, a calculating look on his face. Emily finally broke the silence. "It's not what you think, Sophie." "It looks exactly like what I think," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Credit cards opened in my name without my knowledge or consent. That's identity theft and credit card fraud. It's a crime." "Oh, please," Michael interjected with a dismissive wave. "Don't be so dramatic. It's family helping family. You're always talking about helping anyway." My parents' response is what truly shocked me. Instead of expressing horror at what their younger daughter had done, they began making excuses. "Emily has been under so much pressure lately." Mom offered, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled away before she could touch me. "They were just trying to get back on their feet after the business setback," Dad added. "They were planning to pay it all back before you even noticed." I stared at them. These people who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who were now justifying criminal behavior because it was easier than holding Emily accountable. Something fundamental shifted inside me at that moment. "So you knew?" I asked, looking directly at my parents. "You knew she stole my identity and you said nothing." Their silence was confirmation enough. I turned to Emily, who had finally looked up from her plate, defiance replacing her initial shame. "You owed me," she said, voice rising. "You with your perfect job and your perfect life, always lording it over us how successful you are." "When have I ever lorded anything over you?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I've been helping this family financially for years." "That's exactly it," she exploded, slamming her hand on the table hard enough to rattle the dishes. You swoop in with your money, making us all feel like charity cases. You think you're so much better than us. Emily, that's not fair. Mom began. But her protest was weak and unconvincing. No, let her finish. I said, a strange calm settling over me as years of resentment poured out of my sister. Emily stood now, face flushed with anger. Everything was fine before you started showing off with your promotions and your new car and your constant help that nobody asked for. Why don't you just disappear? You've ruined our lives. I expected my parents to intervene to point out the irrationality of blaming me for trying to help, for working hard, for doing exactly what they had raised me to do. Instead, they sat in uncomfortable silence. Dad staring at his hands, Mom looking anxiously between her daughters. Then Mom spoke words that would change everything. Sophia, maybe? Emily has a point. You can be a bit overwhelming with your success. It does make it hard on her living in your shadow, and you're always so rigid about rules and doing things the right way. Family is more complicated than that. Dad nodded in agreement. You could stand to be more understanding of your sister's situation. Not everyone has your advantages. Advantages, I repeated incredulously. What advantages? Everything I have, I worked for. I stayed close to home instead of going to my dream school to help with Emily. I've given you thousands of dollars. I bought you a car. And now I'm being blamed because Emily committed fraud. You always make everything sound so black and white. Emily spat. That's your problem. You can't see that sometimes rules need to be bent when family is involved. I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA but suddenly felt like strangers. In their eyes, I saw the truth. To them, I wasn't a daughter or sister who had sacrificed and contributed. I was a resource to be used, an obstacle to Emily's happiness, and now an inconvenient witness to their moral compromise. I didn't argue or defend myself further. There was no point. In that moment of clarity, I recognized that no words could bridge the fundamental disconnect between us. I simply stood up, gathered the credit card statements, and walked toward the door. Are you seriously leaving in the middle of dinner? Mom called after me, her voice tinged with the same guilt-inducing tone she had used throughout my childhood. Yes, I replied, without turning around. I am seriously leaving. The drive home passed in a blur, tears streaming silently down my face, not dramatic sobs, but the quiet weeping of mourning. I was grieving the family I thought I had, the people I believed my parents and sister to be. Most of all, I was grieving the person I had been, the dutiful daughter who had structured her entire life around family obligations and expectations. Back in my apartment, I moved with methodical precision despite my emotional turmoil. First, I called all 3 credit card companies to report the fraud and close the accounts. I provided detailed information and made it clear I would be pressing charges if necessary. Next, I placed a freeze on my credit to prevent any additional accounts from being opened. Finally, I contacted a lawyer friend for advice on protecting myself going forward. The practical tasks occupied my hands while my mind processed the magnitude of what had happened. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from my family, but I silenced it without reading or answering. Whatever justifications or accusations they wanted to share could wait. I needed space to think clearly. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My boss, concerned by the unusual request, assured me I had plenty of personal days accumulated and to take what I needed. I spent the day alternating between periods of intense planning and moments of overwhelming grief. By evening, I had made several decisions. First, I would stop all financial assistance to my family immediately. The automatic mortgage payments were canceled, and I notified my parents' bank of the change. Second, I would seek therapy to understand how I had become so enmeshed in this dysfunctional dynamic. Third, I would cut contact temporarily to gain perspective. I sent a single text message to my parents. I need space to process what happened. Please don't contact me for a while. I will reach out when I'm ready. Then I blocked their numbers along with Emily's and Michael's. The action felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. My friend Rachel came over that night bringing comfort food and a sympathetic ear. As I recounted the events, her expression shifted from shock to outrage on my behalf. "Sophie, what they did isn't just wrong, it's illegal." She emphasized passing me another tissue. "And the way they turned it around on you is classic gaslighting." "I think the hardest part is realizing this isn't new," I admitted. "This has been our dynamic my whole life. I just couldn't see it clearly until now. Because you love them and wanted to believe the best," Rachel replied gently. "That's not a character flaw, that's being human." The next few days established a new routine. Mornings began with journaling, pouring out thoughts and memories that suddenly appeared in a different light. Afternoons were for work, where I threw myself into coding projects with renewed focus. Evenings alternated between conversations with Rachel and other friends I had neglected, while prioritizing family and researching therapists who specialized in family trauma. 1 week after the confrontation, I attended my first therapy session with Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, a compassionate woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a direct manner. In her comfortable office with its soft lighting and absence of clocks, I unraveled the tangled history of my family relationships. "It sounds like you've been the family scapegoat and simultaneous savior for most of your life," she observed during our second session. "That's an impossible role to sustain." "I never thought of it that way," I admitted. "I just thought I was doing what any good daughter and sister would do." The work with Dr. Hayes became an anchor in the stormy sea of emotions I navigated daily. With her guidance, I began to recognize patterns that had been invisible to me before. How Emily's crises always seemed to coincide with my achievements. How my parents suddenly reinforced the dynamic by expecting me to fix problems while never holding Emily accountable. How I had internalized the belief that my value was tied to what I could provide, rather than who I was. 3 weeks passed without contact from my family. 3 weeks of intense self-discovery, painful realizations, and gradual healing. I removed my parents from my emergency contact lists. I changed my passwords and security questions. I began researching condos in a different part of Boston, considering for the first time that geographical distance might be necessary for my mental health. During this period, I also reconnected with parts of myself that had been neglected. I joined a local book club, something I had always wanted to do, but never prioritized. I tried a painting class, discovering a meditative pleasure in creating without concern for perfection. I had dinner with colleagues, building friendships that had previously been limited to professional interactions. The apartment began to transform as well. I cleared out boxes of childhood memorabilia I had been storing, keeping only items that brought genuine joy rather than obligation. Photos of family vacations were replaced on walls with art that spoke to me. The space became truly mine, perhaps for the first time. Rachel noticed the change during a Saturday visit. "You seem lighter somehow," she commented as we shared coffee on my small balcony. "Like you've put down a weight you've been carrying forever." "I think I have," I agreed, surprising myself with a genuine smile. "I still have moments of doubt and grief, but they're less consuming now." "What about the vacation fund?" Rachel asked, referring to the savings account I had maintained for years, designated for a dream trip to Japan that I had repeatedly postponed due to family obligations. "I think it's time," I replied, the decision crystallizing as I spoke the words. "I'm going to book it for next spring." That afternoon I made the reservations. 2 weeks in Japan, exploring ancient temples and modern cities, experiencing a culture I had studied from afar, but never expected to witness firsthand. The confirmation email brought tears to my eyes, not of sadness, but of possibility. For the first time in memory, I was planning my life around my own dreams rather than others' needs. 3 weeks without contact stretched into a period of profound transformation. Dr. Hayes's weekly sessions became a sanctuary where I could explore the complex emotions surrounding my family without judgment. The initial shock and hurt gradually evolved into something more nuanced: understanding, without excusing grieving, without drowning. What I'm struggling with most, I admitted during one session, is that despite everything, I still love them. Is that crazy? After what they did, Dr. Hayes shook her head. Love isn't a faucet we can simply turn off, especially with family. The challenge is finding a way to love them without sacrificing your well-being in the process. That balance became my focus. I began to distinguish between loving my family and enabling destructive patterns, between caring about their welfare and taking responsibility for it, between remembering the good times and using them to excuse the bad. The practical aspects of separation proved easier than the emotional ones. I redirected the funds previously sent to my parents toward my own future, increasing retirement contributions and building a more substantial emergency fund. I researched identity protection services and implemented additional safeguards for my financial accounts. I even drafted a will with my lawyer, removing family members as beneficiaries and instead designating charities aligned with my values. Professionally, this period brought unexpected growth. Freed from the constant drain of family drama, my creative energy flourished. I proposed an innovative feature for our flagship product that earned recognition from the company's executive team. My boss mentioned potential for advancement to a director-level position within the year. The most surprising development came through a community bulletin board at my local coffee shop. A flyer advertised volunteers needed for a weekend coding workshop for girls from underprivileged backgrounds. On impulse, I signed up. The first Saturday workshop introduced me to 12 girls between ages 13 and 16. Each brilliant in her own way, but lacking the resources and encouragement to develop their talents. As I helped a particularly determined 14-year-old debug her first program, watching her face light up when it finally ran correctly, something shifted inside me. This is what healthy giving feels like, I realized. Offering skills and support without being drained. Witnessing growth without resentment, contributing without expectation of gratitude or reciprocation. I became a regular volunteer, eventually helping coordinate the program and secure additional funding through my professional network. The work fulfilled something in me. That family obligation never had a genuine connection based on mutual respect, rather than guilt or manipulation. New friendships blossomed during this period as well, not just with Rachel, who had stood by me throughout the crisis, but with colleagues who became hiking companions, book club members who shared my passion for mystery novels, and fellow volunteers who understood the joy of mentoring. For the first time, I built relationships based on shared interests and values rather than obligation or proximity. As weeks turned to months, I began clearing out the last vestiges of my old life. The process was both painful and liberating. Each childhood memento required a decision. Was this something I treasured for its own sake, or was I keeping it out of obligation? Photo albums, report cards, artwork from elementary school all underwent this scrutiny. Some items were easy to discard, associated only with difficult memories or expectations. Others brought genuine smiles and warmth, earning their place in my new life. The most challenging were those carrying mixed emotions, like the hand-knit sweater Mom had made for my college graduation. I eventually kept it, acknowledging that complicated relationships can still contain threads of genuine love. The Japan trip planning became a symbol of my transformation. Each evening, I researched another aspect of the journey, from ryokan accommodations to hidden neighborhoods in Tokyo. I joined language learning groups, mastering basic phrases and customs. The anticipation of this long-deferred dream sustained me through difficult moments of doubt. One particularly significant step involved my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. I had left numerous possessions there over the years, things too bulky for my apartment or too tied to my past to display, but too meaningful to discard. With Dr. Hayes's encouragement, I hired a moving company to retrieve these items while my family was out, leaving a polite but firm note explaining the action. The boxes arrived at my apartment the following day. Sorting through their contents became a therapeutic ritual. Deciding what to keep, donate, or discard. high school journals awards from academic competitions, the worn stuffed bear that had witnessed my childhood tears and triumphs. Each item represented a piece of my history that I was now reclaiming on my own terms. Through this process, a realization gradually crystallized. The family I had sacrificed so much for existed more in my imagination than in reality. I had been loyal to an idea, a hope of what we could be, rather than seeing clearly what we were. This truth hurt, but it also freed me from impossible expectations, both of them and of myself. As the 3-month mark of no contact approached, I felt a sense of readiness I hadn't expected, not for reconciliation necessarily, but for whatever would come next. I had built a life that was genuinely mine, anchored in my values and choices rather than others' expectations. I had created boundaries and developed the strength to maintain them. Whatever happened with my family, I would no longer lose myself in the process. The night before I planned to unblock their numbers, I stood on my balcony looking at the Boston skyline, the city lights reflecting on the harbor. I felt a profound sense of peace, grateful for the painful awakening that had ultimately led to genuine growth. Whatever tomorrow brought, I was ready to face it as the person I had become, not the person I had been trained to be. The morning arrived with unexpected weight. I had slept fitfully, dreams filled with confrontations and reconciliations alike. Sitting on my bed in hand, I took a deep breath and unblocked the family numbers. Within seconds, notification alerts began appearing. 14 missed calls spanning the previous day. 5 from Mom, 4 from Dad, 3 from Emily, and 2 from Michael. My thumb hovered over the voicemail icon, hesitation gripping me. Dr. Hayes and I had discussed this moment extensively. I had a plan. Boundaries, firmly established, responses practiced. Still, my heart raced as I pressed play and put the phone on speaker. The first messages were predictably accusatory. Mom's voice tight with indignation. "Sophia, this silent treatment is completely inappropriate. We need to discuss the credit card situation like adults. Call me back immediately." Dad's followed similar lines. "Your mother is very upset by your behavior. Whatever issues you have, cutting off your family isn't the answer. We're still waiting for an apology for how you left Sunday dinner." Emily's first message dripped with familiar manipulation. "I can't believe you're making such a huge deal out of nothing. You know I would have paid those cards eventually. You're just trying to make me look bad again." I listened without reacting, noting the complete absence of accountability or genuine concern for my feelings. The later messages began shifting in tone, however, as my continued silence apparently registered. "Sophia, it's Mom again. We're starting to worry about you. At least, let us know you're okay." Dad's third message held an unfamiliar note of anxiety. "Sophie, please call us. The bank contacted us about the mortgage payment. We need to talk." By the final messages left yesterday, desperation had replaced indignation entirely. "Sophia, the bank's foreclosing on the house." Mom's voice cracked with tears. "We don't know what to do. Please call us. We're sorry about everything. We need you." I sat in silence after the last message ended, processing the emotional manipulation tangled with what sounded like a genuine crisis. The old me would have immediately called back, rushing to solve the problem, accepting the half-hearted apology in exchange for the comfort of being needed. The new me recognized the complexity of the situation and my own conflicted feelings. Instead of calling my family, I called Dr. Hayes. After explaining the situation, I asked for her perspective. "What do you want to do, Sophia?" she asked, turning the question back to me. "Not what do you feel obligated to do, but what do you actually want?" I considered carefully before answering. "I don't want them to lose their home. Despite everything, I care about their well-being, but I also don't want to fall back into the same patterns. I need accountability, not just because they need something from me." "Again, that sounds like a thoughtful boundary," she affirmed. "Perhaps consider what concrete actions would demonstrate that accountability to you." After our call, I contacted a financial advisor I had consulted about my own investments. I explained the situation in broad terms and asked if he would be willing to participate in a family meeting as a neutral third party. He agreed, suggesting we meet at his office rather than my apartment or my parents' home. Neutral territory felt important for this conversation. Only then did I text my parents, "I received your messages. I'm willing to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Westbrook Financial Advisors to discuss the situation. The address is 447 Boylston Street. Please come prepared to have an honest conversation about everything that has happened." The response was immediate. "We'll be there." Thank you, Sophie. I spent the evening preparing not just financially but emotionally. I reviewed the boundaries I had established with Dr. Hayes. I rehearsed responses to potential manipulations. I reminded myself that helping didn't mean surrendering my newfound strength. When I arrived at the financial advisor's office, my family was already waiting in the reception area. Mom looked smaller somehow. The confident bakery owner diminished by worry. Dad's shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat I'd rarely seen. Emily sat slightly apart, examining her manicure with studied indifference, while Michael scrolled through his phone beside her. Mr. Harrington welcomed us into a comfortable conference room, introducing himself and explaining his role in facilitating our discussion. I had asked him to begin by reviewing the current financial situation objectively, which he did with professional clarity. The mortgage was indeed in pre-foreclosure. The business loan payments had been missed for 3 months. Credit card debt beyond the fraudulent accounts in my name had accumulated to alarming levels. My parents' retirement accounts had been depleted through early withdrawals, incurring substantial penalties. As the grim financial picture emerged, I watched my family's reactions. Mom wiped silent tears. Dad stared at the table, nodding occasionally in confirmation of particularly difficult details. Emily's indifference gradually gave way to dismay as the severity of the situation became clear. Michael alone seemed unmoved, his eyes darting occasionally to the door as if calculating an escape route. When Mr. Harrington finished his assessment, he turned to me. "Sophia has asked me to outline some potential paths forward, but first she would like to address some personal matters with you." All eyes turned to me. The speech I had prepared suddenly felt inadequate for the magnitude of the moment. Instead, I spoke from the heart. "Before we discuss any financial help I need to address what happened, Emily stole my identity and committed fraud. You all knew about it and not only failed to tell me, but blamed me when I discovered it. That broke something fundamental between us." Mom began to interrupt, but I held up my hand, continuing firmly. "I've spent these past months rebuilding my life and understanding my own worth beyond what I can provide for this family. I'm willing to help with the immediate financial crisis, but only with conditions that protect all of us going forward." Dad cleared his throat. "What kind of conditions?" "First, I'll help with the mortgage to prevent foreclosure, but the payments will go directly to the bank, not through you. Second, I'll assist with the business loan on the condition that Emily and Michael take financial responsibility classes and establish a repayment plan to me, even if it's small monthly amounts." Emily's posture stiffened. "So you're still trying to control everything?" "No," I replied calmly. "I'm establishing boundaries that respect both my contribution and your agency. I'm offering help that doesn't enable harmful patterns." Third, I continued, "We all attend family therapy together for at least 6 sessions. I'm not interested in blame or punishment, but I need acknowledgement of what happened and commitment to healthier relationships going forward." The silence that followed felt endless. I watched emotions play across their faces, resistance, calculation, and finally reluctant recognition of reality. Mom spoke first. "We don't deserve your help after what happened, but we're grateful you're offering it anyway." It was the first genuine acknowledgement she had offered, and something tight in my chest loosened slightly. Mr. Harrington guided us through the practical details: payment schedules, class registration, therapist recommendations. Michael's contributions to the conversation were minimal, his discomfort with accountability evident in every shifting glance and non-committal shrug. I wondered if his relationship with Emily would survive the new paradigm, but recognized that wasn't my concern to manage. As the meeting concluded, an awkward moment hung between us. The usual family farewell of hugs and kisses felt inappropriate given all that had transpired. Instead, I offered a small smile and a simple, "I'll be in touch about the therapy appointments." Outside the building, Emily caught up to me in the parking lot. I expected recrimination or manipulation, but instead she asked quietly, "Why are you still helping us after everything?" I considered the question carefully because letting you suffer won't heal what was broken, but enabling destructive behavior won't help either. I'm trying to find a middle path. She nodded, something like respect flickering briefly in her eyes before she turned away. The first family therapy session a week later was as difficult as I had anticipated. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a specialist in family systems, created a safe but challenging space for us to begin the hard work of untangling decades of dysfunctional patterns. Mom cried through much of the session. Dad spoke more honestly about his feelings than I had ever heard. Emily alternated between defensiveness and glimpses of genuine remorse. Michael stopped attending after the second session, and shortly thereafter, Emily announced they had broken up. I offered support without overstepping, mindful of our new boundaries. Progress came in small moments rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Mom calling to ask how I was doing without immediately following with a request. Dad expressing pride in my recent promotion without qualifying it with comparisons to Emily. Emily herself making the third monthly repayment on time. A small amount, but symbolically significant. 6 months after the confrontation, we celebrated Mom's birthday at a restaurant rather than the family home. The conversation flowed more easily than I had expected, punctuated by genuine laughter and only occasional awkward silences. When Emily raised her glass in a toast, her words surprised me. To Sophie, she said, "Meeting my eyes directly for teaching us that real love sometimes means saying no, and that helping isn't always the same as fixing." The journey toward healing our family remains ongoing. Some days bring frustration and backsliding into old patterns. Other days offer hope that we're creating something healthier than what came before. I maintain my boundaries with vigilance, recognizing that they protect not just me, but all of us from the damage of enabling and codependency. My life continues to expand beyond family obligations. The coding workshops have become a central part of my identity. My trip to Japan fulfilled every expectation and planning the next adventure, and African Safari brings similar joy. New friendships deepen, romantic possibilities emerge, and professional growth continues. Most importantly, I've learned that answering the call, both literal and figurative, from family doesn't mean abandoning myself in the process. True connection requires boundaries as much as openness, accountability as much as forgiveness, interdependence rather than codependence. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with people you love? Sometimes the hardest part of caring for others is learning to care for yourself first. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and growth. And remember, sharing these stories helps others who might be struggling with similar challenges. Thank you for being part of this conversation, and I wish you strength in your own boundaries and healing in your relationships.